dinner. My name is Christian again, so I'm going to chair this panel, and it's my pleasure to introduce my colleagues who are going to speak. Tim Weichel from the University in Frankfurt-am-Oder, Germany. Clément Pérarnaud, who is working for CEPS, the well-known think tank in Brussels, and we have also a colleague online, Sylvain. Welcome, Sylvain, speaking from Paris. Sylvain is research director at EHESS, École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales. So the topic of this morning is a topic which I had a lot of interest in my own career. This is the EU and member states administration, and then we briefly go back to what we said yesterday about the importance of having a relational approach of European institutions, not forgetting interactions between various institutions. I think it should also include the member states, right? And the member states administration working on the EU. So it's a very interesting topic for us to see how our colleagues are assessing the relations between the EU and the member states administration. So we're going to start with Tim Weichel, then we will have Sylvain Laurence online, and we will finish with Clément Pérarnaud, because I think I have understood that Rebecca Alder-Nissen is not with us this morning. May I just remind you the rule of the game, 10 minutes, okay, 10 minutes.
10 minutes, of course.
Sharp. Okay. So, Tim, the floor is yours. Tim, à toi.
Thank you. I'm a member of European University Viadrina. Our PR offices always tell it's close to Berlin. I prefer, especially to say in this surroundings, that it's a university which is the most international in Germany by ratio of non-German students to students, and it's located on the border between Poland and Germany, and has buildings on both sides. It's a relatively small university. I just say this in order for you to better understand why such a project of observing German EU policy is relevant. Frankfurt is close to Berlin, and we have access to institutions relatively on a relatively high scale. A lot of directors or presidents of the university were well-known figures. Günther Verheugen, by the way, is a professor at our university, and Laszlo Andor, whom you should know, is also teaching at our university. So we have this idea of including people from practical ranks. And when I entered this university, I came from Heidelberg, where I did my PhD, which is a rather mainstream political science institution, and came to Frankfurt-Oder, which has a cultural studies approach with regard to the European Union. And we are also part of the European Culture Network at the Council for European Studies. So the task, not so much institutionally, but academically, was to include two paradigms. So one is mainstream political science. You think about institutions, you think about the treaties, you think about what the Bundestag has as functions, and so on. Whereas anthropologists and even literary scholars, Pavel Levitsky is also at our university, who spoke yesterday, have a different approach, and insisting that you have to look first and then start to make your judgments, rather than coming from those universities. And this was the context in which I entered the Foreign Office. Gatekeeping is a big issue at participant observation. How do you get into such an institution? And I want to say this because here are also some persons who maybe still have to write their PhDs or their thesis. I was present at a reunion of about this size where a state secretary of the Foreign Office said, we need more contact between scholarship and practitioners, you know. And so I wrote him a letter personally the next day. Thank you for this message. I'm very happy to come into your to assist you in that. And for some reasons it worked. So it was not you know, was not that I knew somebody from childhood or so. It can work this way. And it's also a more general point. If you take politicians at what you think they intend to say, they are relatively open. And he was at that moment really open, and only at a later stage I found out that it was actually quite a debate if they should let somebody from scholarship into the Foreign Office. I was able to read everything except for secret and top secret rated documents, and I stayed for a few months in Berlin, 3 days per week, and then went for about a month to Brussels to the permanent representation. This was more than 15 years ago, 15. And I've kept up ever since, you know, maybe with 1, 2, or 3 interviews per year. But the participant observation I'm relying to today is relatively old. So what were the findings? We were talking about something yesterday which is relatively clear, and you know, I just want to mention it, but I think it's not new and it's well established. Yeah, participant observation leads to findings which allow a close insight. And you choose the method if you don't have any other means of getting into details of a certain work. Once you do participant observation, you have to be relatively clear that you are entering a field where you cannot generalize afterwards. You know, when I looked into the German Foreign Office, I didn't gain insights which would help me to understand the French Foreign Office, for example, yeah, or to have deepened insight into a German parliament. But what you see there is relatively close, and in this case valuable. I always had the feeling when speaking at conferences or in many circumstances that I had a big advantage to colleagues who never worked in any institution, you know, but simply by saying, well, I think this is that way, and the main advantage is not so much the knowledge, because the knowledge you can also gain from books, but the fact that you are somehow convinced to your inner self that what you saw is right, which makes this also very subjective. I don't know, maybe we can talk about this later, because we haven't talked about that too much yesterday, to which extent the personality of the observer enters into this method. I told you that I came from Heidelberg University with a mainstream approach. I don't know, which is a European or transatlantic mainstream approach, which means, other than my colleague Pavel Levitsky, I value paradigms or theories, democratic theory, liberal democratic theory. And I think most people who are here today come somehow from the same school. And therefore I try to think, what could I say? I think that doubting these paradigms is one of the main insights of participant observation. Yeah, I don't deny that paradigms are there, but it leads you to, I mean, looking at the way German civil servants work, both in the Auswärtiges Amt and on the Brussels scene, does not only reconfigure your way of thinking how they work, but it reconfigures the paradigms and the main theories you rely to. And of course, you have to be aware of that, and you have to be open for this. This is one of my main points. You have to be open to find not only new facts, but you have to be open, and in a way, even you have to be willing to reflect on paradigms in order to catch the main advantages of participant observation. Since I only have 3 minutes left, let me say 2 things now in terms of content. So which were paradigms which I were ready to doubt afterwards? The first concerned secrecy. If you look at the major debate on reforms of the European Union, on the democratic deficit of the European Union, but also in general on the relationship of elites and the public. You rarely would find positions which theoretically justify it's good that political decisions are taken in secret. I mean, this is I don't have to go into details here. And I found an interesting fact that these diplomats had the opinion that secrecy is bad as such, but they had met experiences, especially with regard to German parliamentarians or the parliamentarian scene in general. Once you somehow open it up and tell what you're thinking and give details you don't have to do, the next day everybody knows them. So there's a deep mistrust in the capacity of parliamentarians or the parliamentarian arena to keep secrets. On the other hand, of course, they have in the council, in the working groups and so on, they have to make deals and they have to make sure that, let's say, French diplomats don't find out about the German position through channels they have leaked to parliamentarians. And therefore, efficiency is assured by keeping something secret. I found this interesting. Maybe we want to discuss about it. And the second is a constellation which I was not aware of so much before. I mean, if you read Simon Hicks's book on the European Union, you find this, which was revolutionary 25 years ago, not anymore maybe. The Council is a legislative body consisting of governments, which is in a way a contradiction in itself. And then you have to ask, you know, what are the main pillars of reference for these legislators who are at the same time government officials? And in the book I wrote afterwards, Deutschland und Europa, Germany and Europe, the Europeanization of the German system, I wrote something about which I call the triple bind situation of policymakers in the council. These diplomats who do European legislation, of course, together with Parliament, are stuck between three pillars. The first is hierarchy within their ministries. They go to Brussels, for example, and want to go back, you know, and of course, doing too many compromises, let's say with Belgian, Austrian, or Greek policymakers might endanger their situation in their home ministries. So they have to, you know, they have this bind or this reference. The second is in Germany very much because policy coordination is done in one ministry, or let's not be too complicated, in one ministry in this case, which is the Foreign Office. There is no prime minister involved in coordinating EU policy, which means they are all very much engaged in intergovernmental conflict. Ministry of Economics versus Ministry of the Environment, and so on and so on. So most of German policy making on the EU level is in fact dealing one ministry with the other because of the coalition governments which exist in Germany all the time. And the third pillar is national parliamentarians, because in the end, these officials know that they are elected. They are non-elected policymakers. And it's not only, so to say, an abstract idea in the air, but in many occasions, they get told that they are not legitimized to do this kind of legislation, because it cannot be accredited to the German sphere anymore. I mean, it's negotiated in Brussels, and it's negotiated in Parliament, and it's negotiated in the Council, and so on. And so what they do, they have to, you know, they have to deal with each other. And national parliamentarians are the ones who tell them, well, you're not legitimized to do this. And therefore, again, one idea, namely legitimacy, comes back in a way which is relatively unexpected, namely multi-level legitimation. I could go on, but I have the impression that you don't want me to go on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. lot of things also on methodology. We are going to discuss it afterwards, I'm sure, in the general discussion. But it's my pleasure to welcome Rebecca Alder-Nissen, who is with us from Copenhagen. Good morning, Rebecca, and the floor is now yours for 10 minutes. Okay.
Thank you so much. Bonjour, everyone. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person, but I'm getting married in a few days, so I thought it better not to travel too much. Yeah. So I hope the sound is okay. I can see all of you in the room. So what I thought I would do for 10 minutes is discuss some of my recent work and why I think it might be relevant to some of the debates we're having in this wonderful workshop. And thank you for inviting me. I've been interested in this topic for many, many years. And it struck me, I think when I was having a leave in the foreign ministry in Copenhagen from my university position, that something was changing quite profoundly in the way that EU member states and diplomacy worked more generally. But I didn't quite sort of know what it was. But just one anecdote to give you a sense of what it was I was surprised about was I was preparing a meeting for the foreign minister who was having the first sort of encounter with the ambassador from Macedonia. And this is usually a very formal, ritualized protocol situation where you have preparation of some documents, you have his name, his bio, and then there's some points that you want the foreign minister to raise, which are important. The problem was when I arrived and I was quite nervous, it was the first real like one-to-one encounter I had with the foreign minister, was super prepared, came with my little folder, and she was just looking at me saying, well, we already texted together. We already know each other. So all of my work was kind of unimportant. She had her own points because she was sitting with her, at this point, very, very modern iPad and had already had both texted and emailed with him. This sense of like something that sort of disturbs and undermines the profession hung with me, and I had the chance and later to apply for a big grant from the European Research Council, which has been going on for some years. And what I want to relay to you today is just one of the sort of findings from that, which I think might be relevant because it draws on anthropological and ethnographic methods. Okay, so really the question that I wanted to ask is what happens to diplomatic life when it moves online? And how can we conceptualize this move? And what we see in most of the studies of so-called digital diplomacy, if I can use that word, is that there's a tendency that you either study the behind the scenes, so the things we've been discussing so far as I can hear, or things that are on the screen. So it's either offline or online. The problem with this, even under COVID-19, is that our lives are deeply both, right? So how can we think about this in a different way? And this builds on remote and immersive fieldwork we did from March 2020, when sort of the whole of Brussels locked down. We have to ask ourselves what happens to our field. We've been studying digitalization in the EU for 2 years, and sort of all of a sudden, this research kind of magnified, right? So the hypothesis we might all have is that social distancing is a big problem, right? We need that face-to-face interaction, especially in diplomacy. But I think what we saw and what we've been seeing when we observe diplomats that we've been following both before the lockdowns and after, is that the pandemic is only revelatory of much deeper transformations of what it means to be an EU diplomat or an EU member state representative. The first observation we can make is that a lot of ambassadors at this level have this kind of exceptionalist understanding of themselves. If you are in the COREPER, you don't belong to the doomsday prophets. You always coordinate, you're a crisis manager, and you might even argue that they've been able to gain the upper hands in much of the coordination during COVID. So I have just a little quote from one of the ambassadors that I interviewed who said, well, the biggest change is that we have to negotiate with the doors open there are fewer people in the room, and we can no longer shake hands or kiss. There was actually a brief moment when we discussed whether to stop meeting face-to-face, but that was just in the beginning. Now we just keep 1.5 meters distance and we disinfect our hands. It smells like a bar, but we continue our work, right? But what we really see, and here I'm quite inspired by Karen Knorr-Cetina, who does these ethnographic studies of financial trading, sort of how, imagine how you're trading on a trading floor, selling stocks. That has become deeply digitalized, of course. And only recently has the diplomatic field sort of adapted to this. And what she does is she says Irving Goffman was very good at understanding social interaction in the naked form, that is in the face-to-face immediate way, but not in the ways that our interactions, just like this one with me on WebEx, is becoming more synthetic. And by synthetic, she means a social encounter that relies at least partly on technological mediation. It's via scopic media, such as the screen we're all looking at, and it enables us to observe sounds and representations, bringing what is physically distant into proximity virtually, right? So that's the synthetic situation, just as the one we're in right now. And all of a sudden, during COVID-19, what we could see when we followed people in Brussels is that this online interaction all of a sudden became emblematic. So all of the meetings, in a sense, became online. But what we really understood is that actually before COVID, many of these diplomatic meetings were also synthetic. Think about all the texting, think about all the iPhones and smartphones in the rooms, think of all the combinations of ways in which you can be two places at the same time. So now and previously, global diplomacy and European integration takes place via scopic media in these screen walls. So when we begin to think about a diplomatic encounter as a synthetic situation, just as the one we are in right now, it allows us to, come across this online digital or offline naked situation, right? And we begin to think of it as a more blended situation. So just to catch up, the synthetic situation, this online combination of being both here and there, is not new, but it's much more extreme right now, and is likely to have dramatic consequences on hierarchies, status, identities, inclusions, and also democracy. And I can maybe bring that in because I think it's something that's very, very underestimated. Digital devices are not just means to an end, they participate actively in the articulation of diplomatic practice. So when diplomats text each other, when they use their phone, it's not innocent. It shapes, the affordances shape this, but also it enables certain interactions and it actually prevents others. And on the one hand, we find what we would expect, many frustrations, confirming this almost mythical idea of the engine room, the confidential room where you are co-present. On the other hand, a lot of diplomats are actually able to use props and flags and dress up and almost perform a physical co-presence, even if they're not together in the same room. So we should not think of diplomacy as either face-to-face or analog or digital, but as synthetic, this weird combination. And this raises at least two questions. Who gets invited into the online or digital diplomatic spectacle? Who is deemed essential enough to be allowed to meet physically, even if it's getting more and more expensive with flights? How is this gendered and tied to nationality? And how does it make diplomacy more transparent or less transparent? It's super important to remember that even if we begin to be interested in digital diplomacy in the EU, which I am, it's still very physically embodied and embedded and sometimes actively resisted. And it comes with a particular politics of inclusion and exclusion and hierarchies that I think we that are interested in some kind of practice-oriented approach to understanding European integration need to be very aware of, because this will come, whether we like it or not, with a lot of exclusion and a lot of violence, actually. I'm going to end with that. Just a little taster of some of the work we're doing right now, and I can send you maybe references if you're interested. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And we got, I think, your main message. So what happened with COVID and the transformation of diplomacy into digital diplomacy is maybe not something new. It's just revealing transformations, which took place for years. And I'm sure we're going to discuss afterwards again this notion of synthetic diplomacy you introduced. So thank you so much. And now, je passe en français. Je ne sais pas si vous parlez français ou anglais. Sylvain, Laurent.
To be in English.
Okay, then, okay, I'm following in English, but the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I hope the sound is good. I'm sorry I can't be with you today, but I think it's great to have moments to discuss about our fieldwork practices, and thank you so much to having organizing this panel. So I started working on the European institutions in 2009. My thesis was on a seemingly different topic. About the French senior officials, but dealing with immigration policies. So it was not exactly about European institution, but it was already something related to bureaucracy and all high-ranking civil servants can have a relationships with other social groups and especially employers. So I wanted to continue these studies on high-ranking civil servants, but shifting my gaze to an administrative institution where the relationship to the question of the nation was posed differently. So I began to exchange ideas with a group of researchers at the University of Strasbourg, notably with the GSPE, that was a research center that Didier Georgatakis founded and that has played a major role in France in the European studies. So first, I started working with Hélène Michel, who is still professor at the University of Strasbourg, on the question of interest groups. But then I more specifically focused on the work of permanent employees of business association. So I wanted to understand how they interacted on a daily basis with the official of the European Commission. So my field work was mixing archives, but also observation and interviews with senior policy officers of business associations. So I just found on my archive some pictures of my field work. So I will. I don't know if you see the screen, but I wanted to share this with you this morning. So it's yeah. So the results of this fieldwork were first published in French, but it has been published by Routledge in 2018 in a book entitled Lobbyists and Bureaucrats in Brussels. So main results I will present today are in these books, but today it's much more about the making of this fieldwork. I would like to talk. So when the media talk about lobbying, they usually put forward images of the European Parliament. However, most of the lobbyists I met, in fact, underline the centrality of the relationship with officials of European Commission. They are expected to be in the corridors of the Parliament when we watch TV, but when I asked them to show me their timesheet, to show me the list of the meetings they attended to, 80% of their daily work were oriented toward European Commissions, toward officials of the European agencies, and they were working mainly on a daily basis. They interacted with officials. Permanent employees of business associations, they are trying to building coalition inside business association, but they are the only ones living in Brussels. Most of the time, people sent by firms, by the members of these business associations are not living in Brussels. So there are these lobbyists, permanent members of this Brussels bubble, and they are interacting on a daily basis with officials of the European Commission. Some explained to me how they had been able to develop a relationship with particular officials for over many years. And so I did my fieldwork considering that the good focus was maybe the European Charter more than one of business association. So I tried to follow them in the places inside the European Charters where they could meet with officials of the European Commissions. And they explained to me how most of them have developed a relationship with particular officials over many years who had been successful in their own career and has gone on to become a director general or equivalent. So we could describe a kind of parallel careers. Lobbyists are climbing the hierarchies of their own business association, whereas the people they know inside European Commissions are also climbing the hierarchies of the European Association. Some had known each other for many years. So my main conclusion were that this knowledge of this administration was one of the main resources that lobbyists could possess on their own over the years. And it was this knowledge of administration. Of course, they know certain officials, but also they know how this bureaucracy works, and that led them to conduct what people could call quiet politics, where they know that, for instance, the members of European Parliament can change. They know that their work when they try to lobby the European Parliament, is much more exposed to the critics of NGOs. So they are really at ease dealing with European Commission and trying to build a dialogue and a relationship with this official. But the second results of this research was also that this central importance of bureaucratic capital. Following Pierre Bourdieu, we could say that this mastery of the corridors of administration functions as a capital. So this mastery of bureaucratic capital is also useful in the internal meetings of business associations. I've attended meetings where young lobbyists inside their business associations were able to silence engineers from large firms by explaining to them that their proposal will not work in Brussels because it's not like this that it works with European Commission. And they are opposing them with a knowledge of the whole process of the making of a directive or European law. So it's not only something that help you to make your lobbying better towards European Commission. It's also something, this knowledge of administration that work like a capital inside business association. And even if the actors are followed were employed by the private sector, it was a mastery of public sectors, that specific knowledge that form their professional competence. I remember, for example, an employee of CEFIC, the European Confederation for Chemical Industry, explaining to me that he could no longer advance his own case, because the desk officer he saw regularly was now waiting for a promotion in another office and no longer received him. On a daily basis, these lobbyists were themselves doing a kind of sociology of European Commission, a form of investigation on the expectation of the bureaucrats in front of them. They also tried to play on the rivalries between offices to obtain leaks, document, first draft of directives, and without this ethnographic fieldwork, I would not have been able to show and to build my statistical data differently. So this maybe I will talk maybe later, but it's also something very important, different between US and EU lobbying, that during the training for young lobbyists, they're really explaining to them that here there are no pacts and money is not an issue. It's much more about how you build a relationship with a bureaucrat. So a lot of these results helped me to build a different look on statistical data, because I tried to reach this strong link between business association and bureaucracy, also with new statistics. And at that moment when I did this fieldwork, we had a lot of articles trying to grasp the influence of lobbying using the transparency register of European Commission and counting interest groups. But what one can see on this fieldwork is that we have only maybe something like 300 merger firms funding a lot of business associations, think tanks, but they are always appearing in front of European Commission with different caps, with different names. But if we are no more counting interest group, but if you are counting firms and trying to tell the same story, starting with the list of firms, it shows that lobbying is not only about influence, it's a kind of investment. You are investing money in order to be to keep this proximity with European Commission. For instance, also this is one of the tab extract from the book, but it shows that in one row here, for instance, Accenture, of course, they are funding and paying lobbyists in Brussels, but they are getting much more money back from the European Commission. So it's a kind of investment lobbying. If you are just trying to transpose this ethnographical approach to a more structural approach, you can consider this network of relationships between European Commissions and firms in a much more it's a kind of circle of a relation. It's not only about influence, it's also about how you are using the normative power of bureaucracy in order to strengthen your position on the market. But it's supposed to have money from the European Commission from different way, and it's not only an expense, and you can also receive public subsidies, and you can also have a strong role of European Commission with PPPs and the trend today is to have a business association with strong membership with 4 or 5 major firms in their sectors, and they're using the business association in order to build a PPP, a public-private partnership with European Commission, and to appear much more like a co-producer of norms on the market. It's not only about influence in order to have less taxes or but it's or better environment for business. Today, the relationship are shifting to a more corporate relationship where European business associations are producing norms in relationship with European Commission of their own market. So at the end of my investigation, lobbying seems to rely on the mastery of bureaucratic capital in order to orient the normative power of the administration to their advantage. So this made it possible to get out of a binary opposition between bureaucracy and markets. And I think only ethnography or observation can give you this kind of results on this kind of fieldwork. Thank you very much.
Of course, very important topic, which is the relations between interest group representatives. Well, you call them lobbyists. I know that sometimes there are some reluctance to use this word of lobbyists in social science work, but you assume the concept or the notion, and we will go back also discussing what you said at the end with your example of APDP. You know, this partenariat relation sometimes between interest group and EU institution, which is different from classical work of influence, right? As you said in your presentation. So last but not least, Clément for 10 minutes, and then we'll have the discussion. So Clément, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So I'll follow up in English. Thank you so much, Christian. Thank you so much to the organizers of this colloquium and for the invitation. So I'm a researcher at CEPS, which is the Center for European Policy Studies, but I'm also within the academic world associate researcher at the VUB for the Brussels School of Governance, and also a member of the working group on internet governance and regulation of the Center Internet and Société based in Paris. And today I will try to present you the outline of my thesis that I've defended, thesis in political science that I have defended at the University Pompeu Fabra, and I was lucky enough to have actually Christian Lequesne within my PhD committee during the defense, and so a thesis that I finalized in the summer 2021. And the topic of this thesis is states engagement with council negotiations, so a topic that we addressed already yesterday, and try to understand basically the determinants of member states negotiators' influence in the context of council negotiations. And to study this process, I relied a lot on semi-structured interviews, in total 150 interviews conducted with each and every permanent representations in Brussels, except the UK one. Actually, Brexit had not happened at the time, but it was still rather difficult to engage with them. And I also relied on participant observation in the context of a 3-month internship at the permanent representation of Luxembourg to the EU. And so obviously my PhD thesis was drew on both methods to study council negotiations. And so what I wanted to do in the remaining 8 minutes that I have was to first focus on the thesis itself, the few insights that I can provide you, and then look at the fieldwork and the constraint and insight that I gathered in the context of this observation, participatory observation. So when it comes to the focus of the thesis, as I was saying, it's about negotiation processes in the council and the way member states engage with EU negotiations through their permanent representations to first formulate and then advance their political national positions. And so obviously my research drew a lot on the existing scholarship on the council. We can think about this one or Noreen and Wallace, but also on informal dynamics of its negotiations. Obviously we have here Rebecca Alder-Nissen, and I really value the article on track change diplomacy, for instance. We also have Sandrino Smith on the characteristics and socialization of the diplomats within coleurope. We have the book of Didier Georgiakis, and obviously there is a rich literature on the relationship between the EU and the member states. We have here Christian Lequesne, but we can think about Hussein Kassim, obviously, and it's 2 volumes on EU national coordination. And so among this literature, few have mobilized ethnography as a research method to explore the council, with the exception actually of Rebecca Alder-Nissen, Karin Gugen that we already mentioned yesterday, but also former negotiators that drawing on their own personal experiences could share their insights on the council policy making. And I've mentioned Sandrino Smith, but there is also the excellent work of Jean-Michel Grimaud on Malta and the role of all small states in council negotiations. And so, as I was saying, the thesis focuses on processes and the role of negotiators and their hosting organization, so permanent representation, in supporting or constraining their influence in the context of council negotiations. And the thesis tend to show that obviously there are different working practices in terms of training, in terms of human resources, in terms of administrative process. And we mentioned the case of the German case and the difficulty, for instance, for the permanent representation to have a national position to defend. And that's the slowness or the difficulty of the national coordination process has an influence on means and the leverage that negotiators have in Brussels. So that's something that I try to focus on in the context of my thesis. And basically, overall, I try to show to what extent certain member states, negotiators, certain permanent representation have a more strategic approach towards EU policy making, and to what extent, in certain cases, it has a positive connection to their influence, to their bargaining success in the context of specific legislations. I mentioned the training of diplomats. It may seem quite anecdotal, but after having reviewed the practices of each and every permanent representation, only few actually train their experts when they arrive on site. So most of the negotiators actually rely on training themselves basically for 6 months, and then becoming up to speed and trying to become influential in the context of council negotiations. And obviously, it's a structural factor that affects council dynamics. Another factor that I wanted to mention is to what extent permanent representation engage with the European Parliament. Yesterday, we mentioned these interinstitutional connections. And obviously, there are different practices. I've met with a former French ambassador who said that systematically to the attaché within the permanent representation, they would ask an attaché to spend 1/3 of their time within the European Parliament. And I can tell from my participant observation that not all attachés from all other member states would attend these parliamentary committees. And this would obviously impact the way their national position would be channeled through not only the council, but also the parliament. So now that I have, let's say, 4 minutes, I'd like to focus on the fieldwork. I mentioned the fact that I relied on quite a lot of interviews to try to document and try to compare the structure functioning of the different MREFs, not only in terms of the staff, but also in terms of their routine. We mentioned today the fact that they rely heavily on ICT, information communication technologies. And I tried to document to what extent they relied on WhatsApp groups, for instance, to coordinate their position not only within Brussels, but also with the capital. And so I tried to do that to explore these patterns through specific policy processes, mostly related to the digital single market, but I also try to uncover other policy sectors to try to be able to generalize to some extent the insight that I gathered. And so I've relied on this fieldwork and that I conducted for more or less 4 years. So I tried to develop a certain type of relation of trust with the negotiators that I've met. Obviously, in the very beginning, it was quite challenging, but actually with the support of certain negotiators within the French permanent representation, but also within the Luxembourgish, in which I conducted my research stay, I was able to develop a proper working relationship, let's say, that allowed me to conduct this internship and then to follow up with multiple interviews, so to go beyond just the first interviews that I would have with these officials within their offices or in cafe in Brussels. I was also lucky enough to rely on the fact that certain member states, and I can think about the Netherlands and also Luxembourg, actually rely a lot on interns to conduct their work due to their lack of resources to follow all the working group of the council. And that's the way I got into this permanent representation with the support of one negotiator, but I also had to face, let's say, the suspicion of all the rest of the team within my unit. So I can tell you that throughout my 3 months stay, I had to convince that all the IT team within the permanent representation that I could collect a laptop from the unit and go to the different working group within the council without representing a substantial threat to their security. That's something that I had to negotiate, and that was pretty difficult. And in terms of the practices that I tried to reflect on in the context of my thesis, first it was around the role of the permanent representation in the formulation of the national position, and especially from a small state actor perspective, I could from my participatory observation understand better to what extent they are actually most of the time the expert in the room, even within the capital, and so to better understand this process, this navette between the capital and Brussels, and that's something that I try to reflect on. The socialization routine between attachés and the reliance on exactly what we were saying, the information communication technologies to connect and to remain in the loop. And that's obviously something that is not within the radar of democratic oversight, let's say. Also the process of engagement of the Commission with the Council. As you know, after having attended many working group meetings, the Commission is systematically present during Council deliberation, and it obviously has an impact given the importance of the expertise and the technical knowledge of the Commission. And that's also something that I try to focus on. And finally, a last point on the sense of belonging. I've conducted many interviews with national diplomats to better understand this Janus phase, very common fixture of the literature on the council, and to what extent they felt that they belong to the council or to the national capital. I'll stop here because I'm already over time, but happy to have a further conversation later on.
Thank you very much, Clément. It's very interesting, your PhD, I have to say, with a lot of work, field work. So if you do not know his work, it's an invitation to read it. Now we're going to move to the discussion, but maybe before, to launch the discussion, what I'm going to do is to ask one question to each of the panelists and ask you to have a relatively short answer to my question. And I'm starting with Tim. Tim, something strikes me in your presentation, and I was thinking about my own experience of doing ethnography in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because I wrote this book on the French Quai d'Orsay. You did not mention the importance for the researcher to look at places, sites, because when you are doing observatory participation, well, you see also the places where people are working, where people are negotiating. And I always had the impression that to understand the meaning of what they do, it's very important also to see where they are, right? So is it something that you took into consideration in your own research? So that's my question to Tim. Question to Rebecca. You told us, Rebecca, that your main hypothesis is social distance still a problem, but I would like to know a bit more about the very definition of social distance. What does it mean, social distance or social proximity? Could we say that social distance is exactly referring to the same definition today than 10 years ago, because of all the technical processes you mentioned? So I would like to hear you a bit more about that. Sylvain, you decided to use the word lobby and lobbyist, but at the end, when you presented your field work, we got the impression that, well, sometimes what you're describing is a bit far from the work of influence, because it's just partnership, and it remembered me very well a research I did 20 years ago and EU fishery policy. I remember going to the main interest group, which was called Europe at this time, and I was asking the people there, the representative, what is your job? They said, well, our job is to influence the Commission. And then I asked the question, but where does the money come from? Well, I said mostly from the Commission, right? So, and then I understood interviewing the Commission that Europej was there just to legitimize, the relation of the Commission with the profession, right? So is it still lobbying? And that's my question for you. And finally, Clément, can you come back a bit on you mentioned the Janus phase style of decision making. It's a sort of hybridization. And this is why it's fascinating, your object, permanent representation, because on one side, it reflects national practices, but on the other side, the people who are working in permanent representations are also socialized to European practices. So it's a sort of mixed, between both. And how do we observe that, right, as a participatory observer, as you. So I'm stopping here, and please do not take too much time because there are other questions in the room. Tim, bitte schön.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, places and sites. There is no spaces in German politics which are close to Élysée, Matignon, or anything. Yeah, very much is efficient, small buildings, several people sitting in one room, and therefore, I don't know, changing things to the Brussels scene where it's also very bureaucratic and efficient does not make a big change from the perspective of a German diplomat. Things are different. I mean, what I can very question becomes very interesting is again hierarchy, because a minister obviously or head of unit, head of department, then has an office which has about this size. It does not necessarily mean it's nice, but it's big. And so it's called German.
Several windows.
Several windows, exactly. And also 2 spaces to sit in the room. Not only that you sit in front of the person with his computer, that there's an additional table. But this only starts at a very high level. And therefore, this hierarchy is mirrored in rooms and buildings and places in a way. Maybe I also have to say when comparing our 2 approaches, I was very lucky, and I only understood this very late. I told you I wrote to the Staatssekretär, which is in fact the leader of the ministry in many respects. There's the minister, but he has a lot of other things to do, and the Staatssekretär is in fact the minister. He agreed. He gave me a letter. You're welcome. And I didn't even think about it. I gave it to the persons. Look, and they thought, okay, maybe he's a friend of the minister, of the Staatssekretär. Yeah? So I came from top. I met with the head of department the second day, and he told me, yeah, of course, feel welcome. If you have any problems, call me. And I mean, this is just phrases, but in the end, I got a lot of access. I was surprised, but only after a time I understood that this was not because of me, because I was so nice or my university had such a big reputation. No, it's just because within their perspective, somebody came, from the sphere of the boss. Yeah, and the last thing is again on digital. I mean, when talking about spaces, this was. I agree that there is not such a big change. That there is not such a big change with the pandemic when there were a lot of meetings online, because these online meetings were even in 2005 already a practice. And the main issue is who is allowed in. But this refers, to both the digital and the non-digital sphere. The German delegation to the council meeting itself is 6 persons. Yeah? 1 is the minister. If the minister brings his state secretary, only in important cases, that's already 2. The head of the representation, so the German ambassador, that's 3. If he's not sure about certain position, he takes his main official who is helping him, that's 4. So that means there's 2 places left. And there is about 10 or 15 people competing for this because they think it's important. You know, and that was the one moment, by the way, when I got delegitimized. I asked the ambassador, could I come? And he said, of course you can come. But I did not realize that I took one of these very, you know, competed spaces, and I realized right away. And so after 10 minutes, I told him, listen, I think you know, I'm doing something wrong. I'm not so interested in the fact, you know, what's happening in the council. And so I left the space to somebody else. Yeah, so what is about spaces is about competing for seats within spaces. And there is not such a big difference with regard to the digital or non-digital.
Absolutely. And I can just tell briefly an anecdote. When I was observing the daily meeting with the Secretary General of the Quai d'Orsay, well, all the game about being close from the Secretary General, right? Who was close, who was more peripheral on the table, was absolutely fascinating. And not by chance that the people who were close was the political director, the Director General for European Union, which are considered as the strong bureaucrats inside the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Director for I don't know, cultural matters, etc., was just on the periphery of the table. Okay, interesting. Rebecca, are you with us? 9.
She's no more.
Okay, then we move to Sylvain. Sylvain.
Okay. So thank you very much for this question. So yes, in the French book, I don't use the word lobbyist a single time. It was proposed to say at the beginning that this word was much more a word used by journalists, and so I replaced it with economic interest group or economic interest representative. So for the reader, it's awful. And at the end, what is the problem behind this using of lobbyists? And I think the main problem, I will show you this slide I give to my students sometimes. So the main problem is maybe that we are not talking about the same thing, considering we are talking about NGOs or about business associations. There is a gap, a huge gap between money spent by firms through this business association and the NGOs and lobbying or lobbyists. It could let us think that maybe everyone can build its own lobby, and this is after all, firms have the right to defend their products, and citizens are defending common goods, and all this is a kind of this liberal system where all the interests can be brought to the officials. But the reality is, the truth is that even if you consider the biggest NGOs in Brussels, that we could say that it's Greenpeace, the budget of Greenpeace is 10 times smaller than the budget of CIFIC. So, and there are more than 160 employees for the CIFIC. There are only 15 employees for Greenpeace, but it's not only an issue about money. It's also what are doing these employees, the 15 employees of Greenpeace. They are doing advocacy, and they are campaigners. So they are trying to reach people at the European Parliament. They are trying to launch campaign in the newspapers, but they have only one lobbyist or one specialist or expert about chemical products, and they are seated in their antenna in London. So they have to call London if they want an expert on chemical products and not only a campaigner. Whereas in the employees for the CIFIC, they have 160 employees, but if we are considering the background of these employees, most of them have PhD in toxicology, in chemistry, and if they are not at ease with one issue, they can call one of the employees of the 500 firms that are members of the CIFIC. So they can also count on this huge range of engineers in the firms that are members of the CIFIC. So yes, that's true. Lobbying or lobbyist is a tricky word. But when you are talking to an audience that is not very that knows the functioning of European institutions, I think that when we talk about lobbying, we are mostly talking about the economic and interest groups. And I think that people who are today working on NGOs, the range of discussions is about advocacy, sociology of mobilization, and they are not really communicate with people dealing with socioeconomics and sociology of firms. So this is you're right to say that it's a tricky word, and we should not use it so much.
Thank you very much, Sylvain, for this very relevant clarification. So we got your point. Clément.
Yes, thank you so much, Christian. On this national European nexus, we know from the literature that in the working groups within the council are diverge significantly in terms of their genealogy, in terms of their structure, even in terms of their prestige. As an intern within the PERMREP, I sometimes was tasked to actually represent Luxembourg, and I could tell from the faces of the other negotiators that this working group was not the most strategic for the other member states. So even that had come into play when analyzing the way actually this shaped this connection between the European and the national. But overall, I think that from the thesis we can see that there has been a change, and from the work of Michel Mangenot as well, we can see a change in the logic driving the council from a logic of intergovernmental negotiation to a logic of influence. And in the context of my thesis, I try to show that certain member states' national and administrative apparatus are not designed to play into these negotiation games, these influence games, not only at the council level, but more broadly at the EU level, for instance, with the parliament. And these divergences in terms of the national systems obviously come into play and should be studied a bit more in depth. And I wanted to mention another factor is this sense of solidarity that can be created within negotiators. It was very interesting for my participant observation to see that sometimes negotiators from different member states would support each other with their own capital. So let's imagine there was this national negotiators that would diverge or deviate a bit from its initial national mandate, which would not be very silent, but still. And then the other negotiators will not create chaos, will not even inform their own national capital about what happened. So this would stay into the room. And that's something that I really benefited from this observation. Observation is to what extent these factors can come into play, and to what extent it has an influence on the bargaining games in Brussels.
Thank you very much, Clément. Now it's time to take a question from the audience. So we're going to take a series of 3-4 questions. Yes, please. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Go ahead. I don't know if we need a mic for the people online. So be.
Thank you very. Can you hear me?
No, not with words.
Okay. So yeah, sorry. Okay, I'm gonna try. Fingers crossed. Thank you very much for all your papers. I have a few questions for Clément. My first question is, how do you conceive and measure success in your research? And then I would like to know a bit more on the findings of your comparison, and especially if you have observed any sense of what is called a transnational community of practices. For instance, I observed this in my own fieldwork on consular cooperation when it comes to Schengen visa policy implementation, when in your case, some permanent representation will do some sort of benchmarking and try to mimic or imitate the practice and the strategies of other permanent representation that seems more successful to achieve their own results. So have you observed any example of this circulation of practices and strategies between the representation? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I had a question. So, Tim, you raised this, you wanted to address this question of subjectivity, and I think something when one talks about ethnographic methods, it matters. And my question was addressed to all of you, actually. So, working on member states mainly, how your maybe your nationality impacted your fieldwork from choosing your subjects, choosing your field, and conducting your fieldwork. And I'm asking the question because being French impacted my own fieldwork and the way I was perceived by different interviewees from different nationality. And did that play a role in your work? And so I mentioned nationality because of the subject of the panel, but maybe if you could also address the gender question. Interesting.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Maybe a question related to this one. During observation, so it's maybe for all of the panelists. Have you experienced moments where people just propose their own explanations of what happened and confronted them with political science? We know that from my field work, I know that EU officials read a lot of political science. Sometimes they write in political science journals. And so have you experienced such moments and how did you analyze this?
Thank you. The last one for the first series, yes.
Pavel has a question online.
To Sylvain?
Uh,
It's a question for whom?
It's Pavel Levitsky online.
No, I don't think so. Pavel is not there.
He is, isn't it?
It was yesterday, Pavel.
No, but
No,
he's here.
I
Simply
see it.
don't see
Okay,
it.
so
Hear me.
where is the hidden Pavel? Okay,
I'm just a voice. You can only hear me.
okay, like God.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, it's his question.
It's his question.
Pavel has a question.
Ah, you have a question. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Thanks. I have not a question, but more of a comment or reflection on the space and sites and also regarding the epistemologies, differences between epistemologies between political science and ethnography. I mean, I think what this workshop made me aware of is that we're very much sticking to the Bourdieu's field concept, and that is also very much connected to space. And that's where ethnography, or anthropologists, as trained anthropologists and political sciences meet. But what about other perspectives? And then I'm departing from what I've said yesterday about not being focused on big hypotheses or big theoretical approaches. What about actor network theory? How is, for example, CO2 going through the political process? What kind of hierarchies, materialities, and persons does it mobilize? And it could also very much beautifully could show you the whole political process that is going on in these very different levels of the whole EU political process. So yeah, just throwing in this this comment or idea.
Thank you very much, Pavel. Well, I'm going to the panel and give the floor to Tim.
Yeah. So on gender, I don't know if this is translated, but the German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, the recent one, has staged this quite famous or heavily debated aspect of feminist foreign policy.
Oh, like the Swedish one.
Yeah, maybe you write. I think you asked, or did you ask? I don't know. Yeah, maybe you write me an email and I can show you where to find it in the communication of the German Foreign Ministry. But I don't know. I read it in German. You know, most likely it's in English because she certainly has, you know, this idea to reaching out, and she is aware that this cannot be done in German. And also political science, is it taken up? Interesting question. And here I guess you have to refer to the way political science is organized in different member states or around the world. In the German context, there's a strong division between think tank political science and university political science. And this would mean that these diplomats, of course, they read paper of Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik, but it's think tank political science. And interestingly, this Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik, they even advise their authors, who are usually with a PhD, political scientists, and so on, to leave out any reference to theory. You know, if somebody writes like something with a reference to theory, there is an editor who cancels this out. And so this means that the political science which reaches these diplomats is, you know, is going, you know, is quite far away from the political science Christian or I would be doing. You know, Christian and Simon Bulmer, they edited this book on national aspects of European politics. This would not be read in the Foreign Office. They wouldn't read this. They read 3-paper short advices on how to deal with CO2 policy. And then maybe a last point on subjectivity. I think the main key here is to theorize what subjectivity means. And in another text, I have done this through this psychological economics, Daniel Kahneman and others, you know, who do this division of system 1 and system 2, meaning system 2 is that part of the mind which reflects what we're doing, and system 1 is routines. And of course, as participant observers, it would be one major challenge to find out about the routines of the persons who are observed, diplomats. And what are their routines? That's what we're interested in a way. But there needs to be a second step, which is system 2-like, reflect what is our routines. As you know, for example, when starting to reflect, I find out that I write very much not for the diplomats, but for my colleagues, like Christian, who would read it at a later stage. And this guides my own perspective, you know, and I told you about case-related paradigm doubting and so on. So this is, this is a scholarly perspective, which I think should not be given up, whereas the diplomats would say you should give it up, you know, because they are not interested in our deliberations in rooms like these. They are more interested in what can be done, you know, how can I be effective? And this is this is also then a case of insisting on scholarly perspectives who have their own value, which is not always, you know, seen like that within the ranks of diplomats.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting chapter by Rebecca Alder-Nissen, who is not with us anymore, on why diplomats do not read international relation theory. It's a topic for research, really.
Yeah, they say constructivism. What do I care about? Yeah. You know, that's what they're reaching.
My experience is that you can have, with people from the European institutions, more academic debate than with national diplomats, because the background of people inside the European institutions is different. You have more people with PhD. You enter the European institution when you are 30, sometimes 35 years old, and after being sometimes an assistant in the university or something, and it's easier to have this kind of discussion with people from the European institution than national diplomats, you know, who just take the exam. Okay, what is that? If you are not back in 10 minutes, we go. All right. Sylvain.
Yes, so I found this question about are we meeting people who are publishing in political science journal very interesting, because a large part of my of people I met on the fieldwork had a background in science, but it was in experimental science or chemistry, biology, and they are publishing in journals, but that are journals of toxicology or chemistry. So it helped me enter on the field, because people wanted to help a researcher, but even if it was social science. But the thing is that the internal meetings of CEFIC or major business association, they sound like seminars, people defining their products and proposing, suggesting tricks in order to register their products to European Chemical Agency or other agencies. So I could just show you what it looked like, but these are slides from a meeting in European business associations, and so it was people asking for how we could submit to European Chemical Agency denial that are much more open for business, and these people are doing presentations of toxicology issues, showing how you could use experiments on rats in order to have better weights for industry. So that's science, but it's not political science. That's science that sound like toxicology, chemistry, or this kind of useful. And they are publishing. Some of them are teaching in universities, and they are giving some homeworks to their students that are could be useful for business associations too. So there is this link with university, but we have to maybe to keep in mind that students in political science are today maybe a little part of these lobbyists in Brussels, and the common language between European institutions and business today, the lingua franca, is much more ecotoxicology or chemistry than political science and notions from social science.
Thank you. Clément?
Yes, thank you so much for the questions. On the first one on success, I must say it's one of the weaknesses of my work. I like to understand what is bargaining success in the council, because obviously it can be either contextual or long-term. It can be an individual success for a negotiator, but a failure for a member state. And then within the member state, you can disaggregate between different ministries, as we just mentioned about the case of Germany. So in the case of my work, I use bargaining success as the proxy that I use is basically preference attainment for member states. So I look at the mandate at the beginning of a negotiation of a negotiator, and I see to what extent what was in the mandate was ultimately in the outcome of the decision. But I must say that in itself, success is much more complex, and that's obviously the weakness of my work, I think. But at the same time, we had to operationalize it in order to understand to what extent certain resources, certain practices may have an influence or not on the outcome of council negotiations. When it comes to the benchmarking of certain PERM-REFs, I think it is a case, especially for new entrants, new member states, not so new actually, but you can see a shift even in the way member states engage or try to promote their own EU national within EU administration. And maybe it's going to be the topic of the session this afternoon, to what extent certain member states have developed a whole strategy around their presence within the EU institutions. And I remember during my fieldwork, I would meet with Swedish negotiators that developed for the first time their own strategy to try to increase their presence in view of the presidency that will occur next in the first semester of 2023, if I remember correctly. So that's something that I see, especially for smaller member states or new entrants. And when it comes to subjectivity, I must say that I try to play as much as possible the different hats that I have in the context of my fieldwork. So I am French, but I also belong to a Spanish university. So in my access to the Spanish permanent representation, it played a huge role. Even though I was part of a Spanish institution that supported the Catalan independence. There was also another factor to take into account, but somehow it played out well. I was also young and non-expert to them, so it helped, I think, to gather that trust, and I think they thought that I would not compromise any secrecy, or I couldn't really go beyond what they knew. Even though I think the more I went into my fieldwork, the more I could bring to the table and already indicate what I knew about the position of certain member states, the different dynamics and patterns, the more I could collect information. So it went both ways, I think. And I'll stop.
Tim, you would like to add?
Yeah, I mean, now, if I understood well, this is maybe an extreme example. Yeah, a French from a Spanish university does negotiations for the Luxembourg in the council, right?
Writing his PhD in English.
Writing his PhD in English. Okay. How that's in a way, yeah, but this of course has to do with the fact that Luxembourg is not equipped to deal with all 150 working groups of the council at the same time. In a way, they have to do it, but you know, you can't employ half of the Luxembourg population to do this. But the things are not so different in the German context. There you have also this quite weak group coherence of people who do the negotiation. They may be officials from the Länder. Then there is, when I was there was somebody from Luxembourg. There was a French diplomat in the unit which coordinated. Oh, yeah. You know, so it's not a complete exception, let's say. And this brings me to the fact, when is something effective? Yeah, the more I thought about this, I came away from this mainstream paradigm political science. While you have an aim and the degree to which you somehow reach this aim determines your success or non-success. To my experience, it's more social. Yeah, if group coherence can and the roles can be upheld, if even the attaché from Luxembourg who does his PhD can is not a loser in the negotiation, but they keep somehow the group, and this is seen as success. Yeah, that's how these German diplomats thought about it. And that's why also they tried to do, quite tricky in a way, if they had something which was really important to them, it was not them who negotiated it. They wanted to bring it to the Commission. Yeah, so it's the Commission who in fact brings forward with the initiative, but also within later stages. As you said, the Commission is always there when in many council groups, in the Coreper, of course, the Commission is always there. And so if you have a person who somehow voices a German interest, but is not from Germany, but is from the Commission, this is seen as, so to say, the most important way. And therefore, a lot of attention in the German EU policy coordination is in fact directed towards the Commission. You know, the Commission plus France, and all the rest comes much later. European Parliament, they don't care about it too much. They don't care too much about Dutch diplomats, or but those are the two. And if they have, and the main art, they think about it very much in internal meetings. Well, we have this interest. it's not good if it's us, you know, the Germans who have their own history and so on, if they go forward with this aim, but it's much better to have somebody else pursue this aim. And that's behind this, that's even behind a completely official line which of German EU policy, which is strengthening EU institutions. That's one of the few principles they follow. It's strengthening EU positions, which in fact, however, means strengthening EU positions there where German interests are behind.
Thank you. Other questions or comments coming from you?
Jim. I didn't want to take time for questions.
No, we have time.
But if not, I'll say I'll make a few very short.
Please.
The question on transparency, I think you are very real, rightly so, because it's a complicated issue. First of all, you have to think what we're talking about. There has to be more transparency when you do legislation. When you talk about relations with Putin, no transparency whatsoever, because you'd be crazy if you did it. You talk about secrecy at some stage. I always repeat to people that when the Council discusses legislative issues, it's streamlined. And the documents which go to the Council are public. So actually, there's more transparency than you think. Trilogues have to be off limits, because otherwise you can't negotiate. One of the interesting things is that since the Council has to stream its discussions like this, less discussion. That's a first remark I'd like to make. What you described about the layers is very interesting, but this is the layers which leads to national decision making and which leads to Germany having a position in the Council. So it's entirely natural. And the question of national parliaments, if you take the Danes, for instance, for every single point on the agenda, the Folketing gives a mandate to the negotiators. That's democracy too. One thing which struck me with several of you, but particularly with Rebecca, you talked a lot about diplomats. I'm sorry to say that European affairs is not about diplomacy. The role of foreign ministers has gone down like that. They just basically, they used to do general affairs, so preparing the European Council. Now they do CFSP. And the countries which coordinate via the Auswärtiges Gesamt, like the Germans, have a problem of communication. Countries which are most efficient are the ones who coordinate via the Prime Minister, the government. And so diplomacy most people in the permanent representations are not diplomats. They come from internal ministries. So it's not about diplomacy. It's not so much about diplomacy. It's more like sort of between national and I don't know what experts who discussing things. One of the things Rebecca said, it was about this online changing everything. But actually, what I said before about the real diplomats on the bilateral embassies, they play hardly a role in European affairs already before online. Why? Well, because in Brussels, the leaders, even at the top level, met continuously. They constantly exchange emails and things like that directly. They don't need a diplomat. They don't need the German ambassador in Paris to know what the German position is. They talk directly to the Bundeskanzler. So that has changed things fundamentally. The fact of Coreper meeting physically was extremely important to keep things together during the crisis. Coreper always met physically. And I don't know, someone made a remark about online, and we had actually changed the rules of procedure to make sure that the Council of Ministers discussions online could not lead to formal decisions. Why? Because you didn't have the Secretariat and the legal service in the room, the Commission in the same room as the Presidency. So you could have had accidents in terms of adopting things. So what we decided is that ministers would take a political decision and it would be implemented via written procedures. So this is a temporary change of the rules of procedure. But in a situation, in a system like the Council or the European Council, you need physical contact. The European Council each time met physically when they had to negotiate. For instance, in July 2020, 5 days, 4 nights, because you cannot do this via. I have many other content, but I'll stop here. I'll say a few more words later on.
Thank you very much. Can I just say one word about what you said? You said it's not diplomacy anymore because, well, career diplomats or people from ministries of foreign affairs are not dealing with most of the issues, which is perfectly right. But I'm not sure that it means it's not diplomacy anymore, but it's diplomacy which is made by non-career diplomats, other people, you know.
I mean,
It's,
you can call it diplomacy, that's right. Not at all classical.
but the way it's done, you know, mediation, trying to create trust through alliance, etc. Even if you're from the Ministry of Transport, it looks like diplomacy. So, but it's an issue for career diplomats, because if it's the case, then the career diplomat asks the question, what is our added value then in this kind of process, right?
Oh, yes. That's a very good question. You said something interesting, that sometimes the Germans go via the Commission. That is true. It happens between member states as well. Sometimes the Luxembourgers were hiding, not sometimes, but very often, behind the Brits organization and others. So, and actually, in intergovernmental conferences, the Commission, when they're clever, work via the rotating presidency. They did this for the single European Act of the Luxembourg presidency. They didn't do it with the Maastricht Treaty, and it showed, because they worked themselves out of the negotiation to some extent of the political union, because it's an intergovernmental negotiation among member states. And so there sometimes even the Commission has an interest to pass via the presidency. So it happens in all directions.
Okay. Do you have anything?
Yeah. In the very beginning, I said one of the disadvantages of participant observation is the lack of generalization. Yeah. And it had, among other things, this background. We need to disaggregate. Yeah? We have, for example, Simon Bulmer and colleagues had this book. It's only 10 years ago, German Diplomacy in the EU. You know, and I also agree that diplomacy, it somehow makes the impression that there is one field, but we need to disaggregate. I mean, what you say is completely wrong if we look at foreign policy of the European Union. There it's diplomats exclusively, yeah?
Yeah, CFSP, of course.
Exactly, and so there we need
but
to.
That's a very small part of the EU.
Yeah, exactly. But then we have to go through the two co-repairs and through the policy fields. In some parts, member states are important, and some parts only few member states are important, and therefore this is the problem of participant observation. And in places like this, you have a tendency to try to put out like general statements, but you always have to be aware. You have to be cautious with them.
I'm sorry, I don't want to, before we finish, I don't want to forget Pavel's question about actor network approach. Tim, do you have anything to say about that?
Well, yes and no. Probably, certainly not enough to satisfy Pavel. Yeah, and it's the problem here is again differing paradigms. And if you take Latour's actor network theory, you start from, also from generalizable statements, which then you can find or not find, but starting from the perspective of the researcher. And starting from this paradigm means something different than starting from the paradigm if diplomacy plays a major role in EU affairs. And therefore, I think here it's we have to be modest. And I'm sure Pavel is modest with this. It's simply about differing paradigms, and asking the same question in different paradigms means that we may arrive at different answers, despite the fact that we're looking at the same thing.
This is why paradigm exists.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to